Good evening. This is Edie Lush. I'm here at the Hub Culture Davos show. Really pleased to be here with you live in 2025. Today's top headlines include UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres describing our reliance on fossil fuels as a Frankenstein monster, condemning the retreat by some financial institutions from decarbonization commitments. His message was clear. These institutions are on the wrong side of history. In direct contrast to the Secretary General, we heard via video conference call from President Trump, reiterating his commitment to expanding domestic energy production, repeating his now infamous phrase, drill, baby, drill. AI also on the agenda. We heard from the Secretary General calling for global regulation of artificial intelligence. He emphasized the need for responsible development to help ensure that AI benefits all of humanity and doesn't deepen the existing inequalities. Pope Francis, through his envoy, also cautioned about the ethical implications of AI. We also heard from Ruth Porat, the Chief Investment Officer of Alphabet, discussing AI's transformative potential in healthcare, drug discovery, and improving early disease diagnosis. Up tonight, we are joined by a powerhouse lineup of thinkers and doers. Rebecca Winthrop, she's here with me now, driving innovation in education to ensure equitable opportunities for all. Vilas Dhar will also be with us, exploring the transformative impact of exponential technologies. We've got Azeem Azhar, Arun Gupta, reimagining sustainable food systems, and Bill McDonough, pioneering circular economy and climate smart design. We've also got Jeff Nussbaum, uncovering the power of words to shape history. So, Rebecca, you are a global expert on education. You're at Brookings as a global education expert. Tell me a little bit about the new book. The new book, let's see it.
The new book, The Disengaged Teen, Helping Kids Learn Better, Feel Better, and Live Better, which I have co-authored with my colleague, Jenny Anderson. It is a book for parents and teachers about how to motivate your kids to love learning and do well in school and in life.
Okay, so tell me how. What's the secret sauce?
The secret sauce is, one, you should know that grades only tell half of the story. How kids learn, how engaged they are when they are in school or learning in any other activity is the other 50% of the story, because how kids learn actually build a lot of the skills they need, not only to do well in school and get good grades, but to feel well in school while they're doing it. And how kids feel about learning really affects how they do. And also to prepare them for a world of AI. We've heard a lot this week about generative AI and the pipeline of talent and worker reskilling. Well, you have to start with kids.
So if that's important, if its grades are not the only thing, which not a surprise, but why are education systems still so focused on it? And what can we do as parents, as teachers, as people who are involved in the system to change it?
So parents can't change what they can't see. So we have developed a map, if you will, for parents to see engagement. So kids show up in 4 ways. One, they show up in passenger mode, they're coasting, doing the bare minimum. Second, they show up in achiever mode, where they're trying to get gold stars in every hoop put in front of them, which can be good, but actually has its downsides, and they end up being quite fragile learners. Often they can show up as in resistor mode, which everyone dubs the problem children, class clown, not doing homework, skipping school, school refusal. And then a few of them show up in explorer mode, which is where they have they're proactive and take initiative over their own learning and are able to follow their curiosities. And that is the mode we want most kids to spend most time in.
Well, how do we get them there? How do you get somebody who's in, is it overachiever or just achiever mode?
Achiever mode into explorer mode.
Yeah, how do we get them there?
Yes. So the worrisome part, which is a worrisome part for schools, and there's a bunch of people doing the work in schools, is that we found in our research with our Brookings and Transcend colleagues, we surveyed over 66,000 students, less than 4% of junior secondary and secondary or middle school and high school students are regularly in explore mode in school. This means parents have a lot to do at home because you do not have to be in a math class to be in explore mode. So there's a host of things you can do. One, when you ask about their day, add asking about what they're learning, not just how they did. So balance performance questions with the content of their learning. Two, it's incredible how contagious curiosity is. Parents model the thrill of learning. Talk about what you're curious about. Talk about what was tough for you. That's another thing you can do, is really help them develop resilient learning muscles. Part of the problem of where kids get really stuck in achiever mode is they're afraid to fail. Huge fear of failure, very fragile, will not follow their curiosity because they're actually worried that might not get a perfect grade. So helping kids in small ways try things that they will fail, show them it's not the end of the world, life will resume, the sun will shine, and you can keep going.
Sky up there.
Are some things, yes.
Tell me about digital, because obviously there's an enormous help that digital technologies, artificial intelligence gives, but the devices themselves can be brain drains. They can suck the living soul out of your children, right? So what do we do about that?
Yes, technical term proven by research, suck the living soul. And in fact, I've just come from an entire panel at Future's House. I was on several panels, and there's a whole program which can basically be paraphrased as, what do we do about the devices that are sucking the living soul out of our children? So you're actually quite spot on there. So it's a double-edged sword. So the very first thing that parents have to do, society has to do, is we have to set limits for screens and how much time kids spend on technology. And Jenny and I would talk about sort of the basic setting of the table. Just make sure kids get enough sleep, make sure they get enough exercise, make sure they're out in nature, and most importantly, make sure they are practicing and spending time with other human beings in real life. We found from our research that so many kids had an active social life on screens. It can turn toxic, but even if it didn't, it does not give them the skills to actually look in the eye, have a conversation in real life. One example, one of the students, we followed 100 kids, we interviewed 100 kids, and many of them over 3 years, we followed them, really liked, this was a boy, really liked a girl, and was texting for 2 months. Live texting, and wouldn't say anything to her in person when he saw her in school. Didn't know how to say, hey. So that is the basic setting of the table. The other thing we need to do is help them use technology in a way that will support explorer mode. Follow your curiosity. You're really interested in meteorology. You're interested in, I don't know, skateboarding, whatever it is. Ask them about it. Dig in. Watch a YouTube video with them. So modeling technology use that supports explorer mode is one of the best things you can do.
Okay, not recommending them TikTok videos to look at.
Well,
unless it's about skateboarding.
Look, if there's an entire which I'm sure there is, TikTok channel on how to do a skateboard trick really well, and they want to learn it, and you can they'll kill two birds with one stone. They're learning persistence, trying it over and over, because you can become a resilient learner, not necessarily always in the academic setting. And watch it with them, talk to them about it, see how they're doing, check in. Don't say you're rotting your brain, your soul will wither.
Great. Rebecca, thank you so much for stopping by, telling us about the book. Let us know how you get on in transforming the education system.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be back in just a minute with our next guest, Vilas Dhar, on AI. And we are back here in the Hub Culture studio. It's the evening show. I'm Edie Lush. It's Davos 2025. It would not be Davos without an interview with Vilas. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. It's so nice to be with you.
So good to see you. So, president of the Patrick McGovern Foundation, AI expert. I wonder if anything has surprised you. Every single introduction I've given to this show, I've mentioned what people have been saying about AI, both inside the Congress Center and outside. What has, if anything, has surprised you?
You know, the biggest surprise and the best thing has been, for so long, the story of AI has been one sentiment all the time. Used to be curiosity, then it was AI will fix everything, then it was AI will kill us all, and finally, thank goodness, we have some nuance. We have real conversations. AI to support profitability, sure, that's what the business want to talk about, we can talk about that. But also what I love, AI for purpose. AI to actually do something good in the world. And for the first time, I'm seeing people come to this conversation not as if it's a technical marvel, but as if it's something that lets them do what they want to do better.
So give me some examples of what you have seen. AI for good, AI for the public good. That's the great hope. That was the hope, right?
I love to start with hope, Edie, and I love that you do too. The hope, look, across AI and conservation, where we're thinking about building AI solutions that track endangered populations, make sure that we're protecting mangrove forests, make sure we understand our Earth as a single connected ecosystem. AI that helps us get better information about health access and education. And what we're seeing is examples that we've talked about as possibilities now turning into realities and deployed against use cases with millions of people. So that's great. But Edie, we can't just be hope alone.
Nope.
There's all this other stuff going on in the world. I think you might have seen the headlines and maybe reported some of them yourself. There's a world where private sector AI is just aggregating power, right? And they're making these pronouncements about a world that we might see in 2, 3, 4 years, some backed by science and unfortunately some not. And in this context, I think we've got a lot of policymakers. I've had heads of state come up to me and ask, 6 months ago or a year ago, you told me X, Y, and Z, and now I've got a tech CEO who's out saying something totally different. Who's right? That, I think, is really critical that we put a real sort of camera on and say, what's happening when we've got public misinformation and we've got policymakers who have to make real decisions about what they do in their countries to support an AI future.
So what would you recommend? What do you recommend to these heads of state?
A couple of things. One is I very strongly say the world of AI isn't just a story about applications. We can't just focus on a few pilots or a few stories. If you really want to participate in an AI future, you have to put in place the infrastructure and the work. What does that mean? It means making sure that you're really thinking about your educational system from scratch. How do we skill and train young people to have the kind of skills to work in a digital economy? How do we think about access to data? There's a story I tell often, and I'll spare you the long version, but the short version is governments that have great access to data about mineral deposits or about where they can site new developments, but sometimes lack any usable data about where there's potable and safe drinking water. These kinds of things that are foundational to building a dignity-based world, and we've never spent the time and energy to collect data about it. That's what we need to fix.
Okay, so I know the issue around the kind of, you can only change what you measure, right? So that's an enormous issue. I wonder who's doing it well. Can you point to a place where you see the data being used really well in order to create lasting important changes for the population?
Absolutely, I can give you so many examples. Let's start in the health space, where the data isn't merely about measuring what's happening, but training AI systems that actually create a new future for us. In rural India, for example, in Rajasthan, we work with an incredible organization called Kushi Baby. And what they've done is this. They've spent 20 odd years being direct medical and clinical care providers in some of the most rural, vulnerable, and poor villages in the world. They've gone there to support new mothers, to help them through their antenatal care and their postnatal care. And they've taken all of the data that they have from that work in some of the most dangerous places on Earth to train AI models that help us do things like ask the question, over the last 20 years, where have we seen real problems? Spikes in infant mortality or in mother's health? Within 6 months of deploying an AI model, they were able to identify some clusters of areas where there were real challenges. They sent their own people in to say, why is this happening? They worked with the government to find a solution, and a year later, we had massive increase in health and welfare of people. This is a perfect story of AI at scale, right? It starts from a human problem, a place where AI can be used to create a public good. It requires really smart engineers, sure, but it also requires really smart and caring and empathetic people who are engaged in social and humanitarian work. And together, they can drive transformation for first a community, and now potentially hundreds of millions of people that'll use the same system.
I love it. All right, I want to go on with you forever. I can't. I'm going to just finally ask you.
Yeah.
Been coming to Davos for quite a few years. What's the biggest change you've noticed since you started coming?
Well, I'm going to tell you about a positive change. I think when I came here the first time and I started talking about how we needed to transform our institutions, people looked at me as if I was outside of the mainstream. People ask questions like, well, why can't we just fix the institutions we have? What does it mean that we need to transform them? But today we're in a different place. We have conversations about trust, and people realize that trust in what we've been doing is at a historic low. And if we want to regain trust, it's not just about doing better. It's actually about coming together to have a social conversation about what our contract is as a society and how we build institutions that advance that. Now, I'm no naive optimist. I know that conversations are conversations, but to me they're a start, and they're the kind of start that we want to build momentum on over the year ahead.
All right, Vilas, thank you so much for stopping by the Hub Culture Evening Show. I'm Edie Lush. We will be back in just a minute.
Thanks so much, Edie.
I'm Edie Lush, and we are here in the Hub Culture studio in Davos. It's 2025. Pretty warm under the lights here, a little bit cold outside. Very pleased to be here with Arun Gupta. How are you?
Thank you, Edie. Glad to be here.
Great to see you. You are the author of Venture Meets Mission, the CEO of NobleReach Foundation, and I'm really interested in your insights on some of what's in your book. But before we get there, tell me what is hitting you at Davos this time.
Yeah, so in the conversations, the convenings I've been at Davos, it's clear that there's a focus around geopolitics. There's a focus around technology fusing with geopolitics and being used as in great power competition. And how do we fuse that together? Change in administration in the U.S. further amplifies that. What's been striking to me is everyone's focused on policy, everyone's focused on regulation of tech, but what they're not really talking about, which I think is the core issue, is how do you get the right talent into government so that we can create the right collaborations between the private sector and government as well. Unless we have that talent that has been in both and engenders that trust, it's difficult to have fundamental collaborations that are going to make a big difference.
So getting tech talent into government, it sounds like we have somebody right at the top who might be able to help. We've got Elon Musk as the first buddy. Do you think that'll make a difference?
I think it will. Look, I think this is not a new idea. It has started with President Obama and some of the institutions that they've built. But now I think we're at a moment in time where we need to think about how do we scale these kinds of efforts. Not how do we get 10s and 20s in, but how do we get hundreds and thousands of people in. So that requires real structural change. It's beyond just leadership. It's about changing the structure of how we onboard folks. And I think that's the time we're in right now. And I think that's an exciting time. I also think you have a generation of folks that are really eager to participate in this. They're coming off of, conflicts related to COVID. You had geopolitical conflicts, environmental conflicts, now great power competition. You have a generation that's probably more ready to serve than previous generations. So how we tap into that and bring them into the fold, I think it's going to be the real opportunity for us. And the moonshot, which is a talent moonshot, like getting our best and brightest coming into government, not to be government service for their entire career, but at least start their career there.
So you've written about how that terrible world public-private partnerships actually can work in quite an interesting way, right? So it's the idea of getting a sort of venture mindset together with something that's good for the public. Yeah. Let's talk about some of the, you've written a lot of case studies. There's an interesting one with Moderna. Tell me about that.
So what we try to get at a bit is that government has its own risk incentive culture. So it's really risk averse. You get judged on mistakes you make. In the private sector and venture, you get judged on your best deal. And so if we really want to take risks, we need to think about how we think about collaborating between government and the private sector. When we think about collaborating with ventures, it's even more important to be thinking about not just large company public-private cooperation, but how government can be offering contracts out to innovative companies so that they're able to scale in a meaningful way. So Moderna is a good example. Moderna started off with government research, with mRNA research was all government research. They let it come out to the private sector. And then when we hit the COVID crisis, the government puts out an outcome there that says any FDA-approved vaccine, we will buy X amount at certain price points. That allows then the private sector to mobilize capital, talent, and technology to see if they can meet that need. And what we saw was an undoubtable success with what happened with Operation Warp Speed.
Fascinating. And what about the space race? Again, with Elon Musk at least involved in government, and with the technology advancing at such a rapid pace, where our eyes are tuned upwards. Tell me about where we might see venture meeting government there.
Well, we had a good example of this, of the way NASA really, when we stalled a bit in 2010 in the space launch market, looked to the private sector. And again, with federal funding, really looked to the private sector to help rebuild our space launch industry, and hence came SpaceX. So with great fortitude from entrepreneurs like Elon Musk and others that have gone into that. But everyone needs to remember, it started with government funding. Without government funding, these companies don't exist. Right. But that's the kind of collaboration, and the key in that collaboration was the government placing an outcome. If we can see this outcome reached, then here's what you get at the end of it. That transparency allows the private sector to, again, mobilize the talent, the capital, and technology to see if they can meet that milestone.
Interesting. I wonder what you think we should see more of in order to see more of this collaboration happen.
Yeah, look, I'm biased. I was a VC for 25 years, and then I've been teaching at Georgetown and Stanford. So I've been in the academic sector and the venture sector. And what I think we really need to be seeing more of is a focus on having our best and brightest being creating pathways for them to come into government for 1 to 2 years, and even longer. We need more dual citizens. We need more people that have been in the private sector and the public sector. We've gotten to a point in our Western democracies where we've created pathways where people either stay in the public sector or they stay in the private sector. And that creates distrust. The more people that we have that have been in both, the more we can regain that fabric of trust in our society. And that's a trust deficit that we're in right now. Without trust, the policies that we put in place, the regulations we put in place really don't matter, right? And that's why I keep coming back to talent. Talent is the imperative moonshot, I think, right now for us, is to really think about like how we create this whole generation of dual citizen change makers.
I like the idea of dual citizens coming into government to work. Thank you so much, Arun, for stopping by the Hub Culture's evening news show. I'm Edie Lush. We'll be right back in just a moment. And we're back. My name is Edie Lush. I'm here with the Hub Culture Evening News Show, coming to you from Davos 2025. Delighted to be here with Azeem Azhar. How are you?
I'm very well, Edie. It's Thursday in Davos, which means stamina is just starting to waver a little bit.
Goes down a few notes every day as the sort of the lack of sleep starts to hit.
The lack of sleep, so the consumption of Ricola pastels increases with every given day. Yeah.
So tell me what has surprised you at this Davos. That I know you're an expert on artificial intelligence. I imagine even you can be surprised.
I was definitely surprised about AI. So last year, Davos was crawling with AI, and it was crawling with that AI story that AIs might become self-aware, crawl out of their data centers and hit us on the head with hammers. Yeah. It's all about the risk. It's more sensible this year, but one thing has really stood out to me, and that is that Dario Amodei, who is the founder of Anthropic, they build one of these, the best large language models, has been going around and giving essentially the same stump speech, which is within 2 to 3 years, he expects to have developed an AI system that will be Nobel quality, better than PhD quality, in a really large range of domains. And that is really important. It's not because he hasn't said that before. He started to earlier this summer. It's not because Sam Altman from OpenAI hasn't also said that. It's that I don't think ordinary people who are not deep in AI like I am have heard and understood what that means. And so for Dario to say this at mainstream events, at big dinners that I was at, I think was significant, not just because new people were hearing it. And the bit that's doubly surprising, it's a surprise wrapped up in a surprise, is people were like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Now let's move to the next topic. What's going to happen with interest rates?
Right. So tell me, that sounds to me like artificial general intelligence will be mainstream in 2 years. Is that?
Well, I'm not sure it would necessarily be mainstream. It just doesn't exist anywhere today.
Yeah.
But in 2 years or 3 years, these top AI labs will have developed something that you might call artificial general intelligence. And once a piece of software is developed once, we know that you can make many copies of it.
And therefore, what does that mean? What's that going to mean?
Well, I could ask you that as well. It's such a big question, and the AI people and their policy teams are thinking about it, but it's really a big question for all of us. And so what it means, I think, is that we should start having a deeper and wider conversation, and a real conversation, broader than just the Silicon Valley geniuses who are pulling the technology together. So I'm not avoiding your question. I'm saying that there isn't a simple answer, and the right thing to do is for people to listen to the things that Dario has said, to read some of the things I've written over the past 8 or 10 years, and to take them at face value, and now start to ask the question, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for my family? What does it mean for my company? What does it mean for my community?
So I wonder, we're running out of time, sadly, but I do want to ask you about the general vibe here in Davos. For me, it depends on who you speak to.
Yeah.
How are the Europeans you're speaking to?
The Europeans, they're not miserable, it's funereal.
Is it?
It is like a wake out there. And everyone I bump into who knows I'm British, so they know that I'm from Europe or some part of Europe, says, wow, the mood in Europe is bad. People are really miserable. I think what has happened is, Trump has changed the game in the US. American business is getting really excited about the potential for growth. The things he is doing, we know largely do accelerate growth. And we're not doing any of that or enough of that with enough alacrity, with enough vim and vigor in Europe. And having had 15 years of lower GDP growth rates than the US, so that even the poorest states in America are richer than many rich countries in Europe, like Mississippi is as rich as the UK on a GDP per capita basis, there's a sense that Europe will fall further and further behind.
Which is pretty grim, isn't it? What would you do? What's your one piece of recommendation? What's your piece of
You know,
advice you'd give?
the one thing that we could do, because it's a statement of intent, is say we are going to be really pro-innovation, pro-technology startups, and I think you can do that by saying, look, employment regulation, which is onerous and was designed for people working in car factories and coal mines, is not appropriate for high-skilled, high-speed startups. You take away those social protections because that talent does not need the protection of the state. And that is a signal for Europe to say, we're going for it.
Azeem, thank you very much for stopping by the Hub Culture Evening News Show. I'm Edie Lush. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Hub Culture Evening News Show from Davos. And I'm here with an old friend, Bill McDonough. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Great to see you. We opened there with a shot of the Icon building. You and I usually speak in your building, which is of course just down the road, the Ice House. And there we talked a lot about circular economy. Here we talk about regeneration. And I'd love you to just explain the difference to me and why they're both important.
Great. Well, our protocol is cradle to cradle, actually. And the idea of cradle to cradle is that we eliminate the concept of waste. And one thing's waste is another thing's food. We use current solar income to power systems. And we celebrate diversity. Now, when you translate that into circular economy language, we realize there are really two metabolisms. There's the biological metabolism and then a technical metabolism. So for us, the regenerative metabolism is the biosphere. So we have a regenerative biosphere. And so things can go back to nature, like this building, made with wood. And then we have technical buildings in the technosphere, objects. Those go back to industry. They're not really meant to go back to the soil, per se. So we have the regenerative biosphere and the circular technosphere. So the Ice House is a circular technosphere building. It can be disassembled, and it comes up and goes down very quickly, and all the parts can be reused. So it's circular. And it's important to know that there's a difference between circular and regenerative, because regenerative has a life force in it, which is very special, as we know. So the technosphere is materials that go back into cycles. And when we design, we don't call it design for end of life, because I hate language that scares children. Right?
It's never good to scare children.
Don't say that to children. We're designing for the end of life. It's
Right.
horrifying. But if we say we're designing for the end of use, it begs the next question, literally and figuratively, which is, what's the next use? So we actually design technical objects for next use. So you know where it goes next. It's designed into it. So
Okay.
the Ice House is designed for disassembly, it's designed for reassembly. The aluminum can go back to aluminum. The walls can go back to polymer. So it's like that.
Got
So
it.
that's circular. When someone says, I'm circular, that doesn't mean it's good. Because what if you're making toxic things
Right.
and you do it again? Well, that's worse. So circular is not a qualification, it's a quantification.
Okay.
It means again.
Got it.
Okay? So we also need to watch out for healthy and safe materials and systems. Now, with regenerative design, like this, we see that the wood is coming from natural systems, powered by the sun. We can return it to the soil safely. If you look at this wood, you know, even the finishes on it are hard to even see. But you can make it so that those are all perfectly biodegradable and safe. So that could be regenerative, because this can go back to living systems and become hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, and then becomes a source of life again. See? So it's next.
Okay.
But it's next as a living system. So we have a technical system and a living system, and they both cycle.
Okay. Thank you for
Does that help?
Now I understand.
Yeah.
I run into you not just in Davos, but in other places around the world. Sometimes I meet you in Saudi Arabia, and I know that you're involved in a bunch of innovative things. Tell me a little bit about what you're up to there.
Well, the one that I'm excited about now, I have a research professorship at KAUST, the Science and Technical University. Just because I don't have to teach, but I get to do my research work. One of the things that we've come up with, very excited about, is the ability to use sand dune sand for concrete. Now, that may not sound like some big mystery, but it has been. Sand for construction wants to be what we call sharp. So it's got edges and it can lock together. Sand dunes have sand that have been tumbling over each other
Quite round.
in the wind. They're very round. They're spherical. in
And they're
fact.
old, right?
Well, they can be. And they're essentially little spheres. They don't want to stick together. They want to roll around each other. That's why you see a sand dune is like a liquid.
Right.
Yeah. So we haven't been using that in concrete. Now, there's a place called the Empty Quarter in the Arabian Peninsula, which is the size of France. And it's sand dunes, and it's very hot, right? And there's very low very low biological activity there. So if we could use that sand, it would be very helpful, because sharp sand comes from water eroded sand. That's riverbeds, that's beaches, ancient or modern. So to get sand for construction, we have to take it from places that have been water eroded. And when you look around the world right now, sand is the most smuggled thing in the world. The amount of aggregate required for concrete is 50 billion tons. I mean, think about that. So there are people stealing sand. And,
all over the world.
Yeah, there's sand mafias in India. There's Moroccan places is disappearing at night. The Chinese are vacuuming sand off of the beaches in Taiwan. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So using local materials is key to any sustainable agenda. So we like to think, all sustainability is local.
Okay.
So what if we could use the sand in Saudi Arabia? And the telling part of this is, if you look at the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the world's tallest building, the sand apparently came from Australia. Now what are we doing shipping sand
Right.
11,000 miles to a place that has sand?
It seems ridiculous.
It seems kind of silly. It's like coals to Newcastle,
Right.
except sand in the desert. Hello.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so we found a way to use it,
Fascinating.
working with the scientists, and we're very excited about it.
Nice. What about back in the United States? We're both from the US. I know that you're doing some work in the Midwest. Tell me
Yes.
about what you're doing there.
We're doing something there based on the work of a farmer named Dan Jewell, who starting 40 years ago was doing community wind with the farmers. So they'd put up a wind turbine and they would share in it as a operation. And the nice thing about it is, instead of these giant wind farms or things like that are big centralized power plants that take a lot of space and require heavy transmission systems, what we're looking at is a model where we can put one turbine, relatively small, per town with 2.5 megawatts of solar. So it's a 5 megawatt assembly. It's even hard to see when you go to the town to look for it. It's not that gentle. But what happens is we can produce the power at a voltage that comes in behind the substation from the grid. So instead of having to upgrade the grid in America, very expensive, giant plants sending lots of power across the lines, and then we break it down into the towns, we're putting the power in the town. This is where you use it. This means you don't need new transmission. This means that you have it where you need it, when you need it. Because the amazing thing about the Midwest, it's a big ridge up the center of the continent. And so we got really good wind. It's often called the Saudi Arabia of wind.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so you have wind and we have the sun. And the farmers know about both. And it gives them a new crop to work with. And if you look at the pattern of the sun and the solar, it peaks in the summer when you're peaky with air conditioning needs and so on. So it fits that summer load. The wind, high in the winter, lower in the summer, higher in the winter, that is when we need heat. So for cooling, we got the sun doing it. For heating, we got the wind doing it. And you put these two curves together, and they start to look like a straight line.
Wow.
Then you put batteries into the mix, and now we have base load, which is the key to all this. You have to have reliable power. So now that utility can take advantage of reliable power, they can actually be dispensed because of the batteries at the peak moments they need it. So it's optimized system for the utility, so they get the power, they distribute it to their customers, and they get a good price on it. That works well. And the community gets good power that's reliable and it's local. And over time it becomes part of life itself, sort of the way the windmills became part of Holland.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bill,
welcome.
for stopping by and telling me what you're up to. There's always something new.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is the Hub Culture Evening News Show in Davos. Stay right there. We will be right back. Welcome back to the Hub Culture Evening News Show. My name is Edie Lush. We're live here in Davos 2025. Now I have for a special treat for you an expert on the power of words. Jeff Nussbaum, how are you?
Good to be with you. I'm well.
Good. You're a partner at BPI, public affairs firm, and I'm delighted that it's your first Davos. I'd love you to give me your impressions of what you have seen as you've walked down the promenade and what's really struck you.
Yeah, well, I'll confess to you that for years I helped send clients and people I'd worked with to Davos, and I described it as if I knew it. And now that I've experienced it, I had very little idea what I was talking about. You almost have to experience it to really get it. Just the density of executives, the density of ideas. And this year, I think, and I was asking people what's different, the consistency and similarity of ideas. If you walk down that promenade, I took a picture of every storefront that said something about AI. That's clearly where the conversation is. And I've been trying to tease apart, is that corporate economic safety in numbers? Is it a failure of someone or something to differentiate? Or is it really, is it something that the reality will catch up to the hype?
Right. I mean, 3 years ago in Davos, it was artificial intelligence is coming.
Right.
2 years ago in Davos, it was AI is going to save us all. The next year it was, no, it's going to kill us all. We need a kill switch. And this year, for me, I've heard for the first time a lot of applications, a lot of understanding around what the good and the bad is around artificial intelligence, and also an incredible amount of really important ways that it's already being used for good. So for me, that feels important. I was also really interested to hear the head of Anthropic say that he believes in 2 years we will have PhD level artificial intelligence. So almost artificial general intelligence, which I don't think people quite get the reality of yet.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But one of the things that I think has been different this year as I've spoken to people is it's a little bit of the what, but what seems to have become a bit of a one-sided conversation is the why. And the reason I say that is because on the official agenda here at Davos, there are issues like sustainability and climate change and things of that nature. Outside of the Congress Center, it is almost entirely about business applications. So you're hearing the economic argument advanced incredibly forcefully. What you're hearing less of now is that societal benefit argument. And that doesn't mean necessarily that there aren't people doing amazing work with AI for drug discovery, for climate mitigation strategies. But it is interesting to me that the takeaway from this week has been businesses unleashed to use these new technologies to try to see what they can get out of it.
Right. Well, I wonder if you could reflect a little bit. We heard that our new president, the 47th president of the United States, being piped in to the Congress Center today, and he repeated his words, drill, baby, drill, just after we'd heard from the UN Secretary General, in fact, calling it a sort of Frankenstein moment, frankly, and calling out a lot of financial institutions for rolling back on their climate, promises. So it's a pretty interesting time in the United States. I know you worked for the Obama administration. I'd wonder if you could just give me your reflection as you're over here in Europe of how you see the Europeans and the world looking now at the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had an interesting focus group of sorts on this question the other night. I participated in a debate, and the question in the debate was, has the U.S. and should the U.S. abdicate world leadership? And I had to argue that the U.S. remains indispensable, and I did my best. And in front of a European audience, our team was roundly trounced. Okay. So one of the judges said, it almost felt like it was an act of catharsis for the audience to tell you how wrong your argument was. Right. And so, but the argument I made, I think, remains relevant for a European audience, which is there is an element of America that is watch what we do more than what we say. Because the headlines are the ones made by President Trump, as he did today, and they're around disengagement, but the trend lines are around engagement and market forces that have been unleashed that almost no president can roll back towards electrification of the grid, vehicle electrification, creating a supply chain separate from China. And these things, they're American, but they will benefit the world. So the president may say one thing, the current president, and I've had the honor and privilege of helping previous presidents say things, not this guy,
Right.
but the president may say one thing, but sometimes the trend line diverges from the headline.
You're an expert on words, speechwriter as well, and I would love on another occasion to dive into some of the stories from your book. But I wonder, I like to keep a note in my devices of great phrases I've heard as I travel around. I wonder if anything has hit you this week that you've sort of kept for yourself, either on the good or the not so good side.
Oh gosh, this is really good. And of course, at the end of a long week, my mind is going blank. Is it gauche? Can I pull out my notes app? I've been keeping notes. I've been keeping notes.
I love it.
Hold on. What do we have here? I will pull something up. There were messages. Oh, the one that I was struck by, it was actually not a rhetorical note, but a leadership note. It was a release of some new survey findings about trust. And it said that leaders who do a good job of explaining the why foster more trust than those who do a good job of explaining the how. And I thought that was just a really useful reminder for those who lead and those who work with leadership, that you need to point to the larger goal as well as the tactical steps that get there.
I don't think I've had one interview all week that has not mentioned that word trust. It is literally the invisible substance that can bind us all together or even pull us apart. So,
yeah, indeed. And it's one of the things that we just see over and over, that there's declining trust in institutions. And it's not just political division, it's a question of, are those institutions delivering? I'm, of course, from the United States, where Los Angeles has suffered terrible, terrible fires. And even there, the failure of the authorities and utilities to protect homes and property, even if indeed this was a terrifyingly perfect storm, all of these things, when people see their leaders, their institutions unable to deliver, it decreases trust, but now you have a political overlay that benefits from that cynicism. And so that too becomes its own perfect storm of institutions failing to deliver and then people capitalizing on that for their own ends. And so it is a big question for leaders how, as some of the last institutions that have net positive trust, corporations, foundations, the media, it's all declining, but some of these are still above water and they need to continue to foster it.
Jeff, thank you very much for stopping by the Hub Culture Evening News Show here in Davos. Come back next year. Give us your thoughts again.
I will, absolutely.
I'm Edie Lush. We'll be right back. Thanks for being with us tonight. This has been the Hub Culture Evening News Show in Davos. I'm Edie Lush. We had an incredible program tonight, from issues around trust. We had some inspiring phrases. We had a lot of discussion around artificial general intelligence, and I am going to keep that thought with me that Azhar said, that the CEO of Winthrop told the audience here in Davos that we are only 2 years away from PhD level artificial intelligence. And that will, in fact, change everything. So you don't have to stay with me now, but please do come back tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock Central European Time, for our final day of Davos coverage and interviews.